Much attention in our world, or at least in the religiously orientated world of which we're a part, is given to the concept of vocation, that we all have vocations, that we need to discover what these vocations are, and that once we've discovered them, we need to pursue them. These are all ideas which have been strongly affirmed in religious literature and vocational discussion. Now, I have no quarrel with any of this. It seems entirely reasonable and quite important. But it's helpful, I think, to shift the emphasis slightly from being rather me-centred, that is, it's my vocation, I discover that vocation, and I put that into practice, to shift from that focus to being more God-centred, that is, vocation is what God wants me to do and what God will in fact move me to do in God's own good time. Now, the readings we've just heard don't offer much support for a me-centred account of vocation. Neither Samuel nor the first disciples carefully inspected their mental life in order to discover what it was that God wanted them to do. On the contrary, Samuel, we're told, was young and at that point in his life had little or no knowledge of God. Indeed, he had to wake Eli 3 times in order to elicit a proper response to God's call. "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening," he said. Likewise, the first disciples had to be directed towards Christ by John the Baptist. Their initial approach to Christ was, quite literally, to follow in his footsteps and to wait for him to react to them. Once he did react to them and ask them, "What do you seek?" their reply was a rather minimal, "Where do you live?" What's striking about these calls is how passive Samuel and the first apostles were in the face of them. Their calls as such weren't something they discovered internally, rather those calls were communicated to them by God in the fullness of time. Samuel and the first apostles had to be brought into a space where they were finally ready to hear what God wished to communicate to them. Vocation here is about an openness to hearing God on the part of Samuel and the first apostles, rather than an attempt at introspection which identifies a way forward. That shouldn't surprise us really, however. Each of our individual vocations is part of God's providence, and that providence isn't anything in us. On the contrary, it's in the mind of God, or more strictly, in God's intellect. If God doesn't share knowledge of his providence with us, then we can't discover it. Moreover, we'll only ever be ready to hear what God wishes to communicate to us if we habitually pay attention to God in our prayer. Nor must vocations be extraordinary. To be sure, some, like Samuel and the apostles, were called to profoundly important roles in the history of salvation. Others, though, have what might appear to us, at least objectively, as less significant roles in the history of salvation. Still, such roles are vocations, and as such are communicated to the individuals concerned, by God, and that makes them important, however things may appear to us. Fundamentally, it's God who makes a given vocation important, not us. It's God who communicates a vocation to the individual concerned. It's God who moves the individual to act in accordance with that vocation. And it's God who decides whether the individual concerned has been faithful to their vocation. If we can keep the focus on God and not on ourselves, then we'll be well on the way to finding out what our vocation is, and we'll be well on the way to be pleasing to God. And that's, at the end of the day, what we really want to be.